Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. In today's video, I'm super excited to share with all of you my first impressions of the Pat McGrath Divine Blush Duos. So I picked up two of these, one in Venusian Sunrise and one in Paradise Glow. So in today's video, I'm going to give you guys swatches, comparison swatches with my existing Divine Blush collection, and demo these guys on my face as well, as you can see at the moment. I also already have two of her Divine Glow highlighters, so I'll also show you guys how those look. So if you're interested in learning more about this latest release from Pat McGrath, then just stick around. So to start off, let's just chat a little bit about this release. So my feelings about this release have been a bit of a roller coaster ride so far. So when I first saw Pat McGrath teasing these products, I was really excited. She had this sort of theme of duality, which I thought was really interesting. I figured it probably wouldn't be a really big new release given that she didn't have much of a lead up, and also anything in duos usually implies something that's an existing Pat McGrath product. When the actual promo images came out for this product, I was on the one hand excited in that I love Pat McGrath's Divine Blush formula. It's one of my all-time favorite formulas for blush, and I featured this prominently in my best of 2021 products videos. But at the same time, I was also a little bit disappointed because I feel like this whole year so far, we haven't really gotten a really big release from Pat McGrath. Other than the essence that she came out with, everything else has been more like a temporary limited edition release or just a repackaging of existing types of products and formulas. So we'll see. I am cautiously optimistic about this. The pictures look so beautiful, so I am quite excited still. So let me first just show you guys this beautiful packaging. It's in pink packaging instead of purple packaging like her original Divine Blushes. And in case you're curious, here are the ingredients, and the shelf life is 18 months. So to open the box, you just slip it open like this, and inside you have her standard black lacquer packaging that she's been using for her blushes and also her highlighters. To open the packaging, you just press the button here, and then inside you have the gorgeous blush. I mean, just look at that pattern. So this is why I still bought it even though I have almost all of her Divine Blushes. I mean, look how pretty that is with the two colors. And so this first one over here is the Venusian Sunrise one. And I was excited about this because this blush over here looks almost lavender. It's a lot cooler tone than any other blush I have in my collection. And so I figured this would be a unique addition. This other shade, Paradise Glow, I'm a little bit unsure about. I was super excited when I saw this because it looked the most similar to a bronzer, and I know we've all been waiting for Pat McGrath to come out with bronzers, and also I personally love more neutral toned blushes. But in some of the videos I've seen so far, it seems like this rose shade over here is basically the same as her Paradise Venus shade, which I already have in my collection. So we'll see. I'll definitely give you guys swatches of those two shades so you can see for yourself whether they're similar. So let's go ahead and do some swatches. Oh no! Oh. It's so sad. I don't know if you guys can see, but the rays are already kind of losing their definition from that swatch. The things I do for YouTube. Okay, so let me very carefully make sure I get a really good swatch from this because I don't really want to be doing a lot of extra swatches after this. But here we have that really cool toned shade. Hopefully this still stands out against my skin. And then let me go in on the rose as well. I will say that the lavender shade felt a lot softer than her previous Divine Blushes, which I find quite interesting. This rose is definitely more hard pressed, which is what I'm used to from her Divine Blush formula, but the rays over here really were quite soft. So be a little bit careful if you are swatching this. I'll also just swirl these two together so we can see if we use both sides roughly how it will look. Okay, so definitely it looks a lot more similar to the rose shade rather than the Rays shade. Cleaning off my fingers, let's go into this other shade. Let me be more careful with the Rays on this side. So let's swatch this. In general, definitely the shade on the side with the Rays is a lot softer in comparison to the shade in the rose side, which I find quite interesting. Like, you can tell it immediately from the swatch. So there we go. And then let's just swirl these two together and swatch it again. Okay, so for both of these, and also what I've seen in other people's videos, if you swirl both of them together, it's by and large gonna look a lot more similar to the shade in the rose side rather than in the Rays side. So here we have the swatches. So for Venusian Sunrise, here we have that lavender shade, and then we have the coral pink, and then we have the two shades swirled together. And then for Paradise Glow, here we have the Rays, the rose, and the two shades. I will say I'm a little bit disappointed that for Paradise Glow, there's not a huge difference between these three options. I mean, the whole point of having these two separate shades is in theory to create more dimension, but I feel like all three of these look kind of the same regardless of what order you use them in. At least here there's a difference in temperature, like this one has a lot more of a blue base, whereas this one's a little bit warmer. So we'll have to see how these translate on the cheeks. Before we do that though, let's do some comparison swatches. So first off, we have Fleurtatious. This is the lightest shade in her Divine blush line. So let me just put that over here. So we can see that definitely has more of a beige tone to it in comparison to any of these. Then I have Divine Rose, which I think will probably be the most similar to Venusian Sunrise. So let's swatch that here. Okay, yeah, that looks very similar actually. I mean, Divine Rose is one of my favorite blushes, so I'm not necessarily mad at that. But basically, I would say the shade of the two of them swirled together in Venusian Sunrise looks pretty much identical to Divine Rose. So if you have Divine Rose, you can probably pass on Venusian Sunrise. And then here we have Nude Venus. So I'm gonna put that over here. And Nude Venus actually looks a lot like the lighter shade in the Paradise Glow blush. Next we have Desert Orchid. This is also one of my all-time favorite blushes. So yeah, that's a little bit warmer than any of these, but still relatively similar to the lighter shade in Paradise Glow. And then from her holiday collection, I have Lovestruck and Paradise Venus. So Paradise Venus, I think, will basically be the same as this shade over here. I think Pat McGrath confirmed that on Instagram. So yes, these two are basically the same. So the rose shade in the Paradise Glow palette is exactly the same as this one over here. And then let's see, where should I swatch this other one? Let me swatch this over here actually so we can see it closer up to the Venusian Sunrise. All right, so definitely more fuchsia than Venusian Sunrise, so there's enough difference there. On the whole though, with these comparison swatches, I will say, if you have a bunch of her existing blushes, these new releases might not actually be that worth picking up. If you don't have them though, it might be exciting because you can get two blushes instead of one. So here is a close-up of all of those comparison swatches. So I would say that if you have Divine Rose already, then Venusian Sunrise is probably not that interesting. As you can see, it's a fairly similar shade. And then if you have Nude Venus or Desert Orchid, then you have something very similar to the lighter shade in the Paradise Glow palette. And then if you have Paradise Venus, you already have the shade that's in Paradise Glows. So definitely if you have a pretty extensive Divine blush collection, these new shades are not necessarily that different from the existing ones. So that's definitely a little bit disappointing to me, but let's carry on and put these shades on my face. And if you're curious what else I have on my face, I'll have all the products linked down below. So I'm going to do one blush on each side of my face so you can really see the differences. So starting out with this Venusian Sunrise, I'm going to first take the Oh wow, oh my gosh, did you guys see that? Let me try to give you guys a close-up. There's a lot of kick up in pan, so be a little bit careful when you're stabbing your brush in this. Interesting. This is not something I've had much of an issue with her other shades, so yeah, not quite sure what's going on there, but there is a lot of kick up. Alrighty, so let's just pounce this kind of on the outer portion of my cheeks, just so you guys can see it. I do have my bronzer on already, so any warmth you see is probably more so from that. Oh, interesting. Okay, so it definitely looks pretty nice as a blush, even though it is quite cool toned. Oh, okay. I think especially melding into my bronzer, it actually looks pretty nice on my complexion. Huh. And then with a different cheek pro, let me go into this shade over here. And again, quite a bit of kick up in the pan, though less so than the other shade. And I'm gonna put this closer to the center of my face. So this shade actually looks like it has a little bit of sheen to it. So I did choose specifically these two blush duos because each of these features one demi matte and one shimmer, and I love both of those formulas from her. It's interesting though, when I saw this, I kind of assumed both of these were demi matte because they both look very matte and pan. But now that I'm putting the pink on my face, I do see a little bit of that glow. Hopefully you guys can see that as well. But that's good because I was getting a little bit confused because I did remember specifically selecting these two because they showcase the two different finishes. All right, so there we go. So you can definitely get a little bit more of a gradient effect with the fact that these two are different. Though I will say on the whole, on the cheeks, I don't know that the effect is so different than if you just used one shade. Very pretty though. I do like the way this looks. I think especially this rose shade is a little bit distinct from the rest of my Pat McGrath shades, because you can see here it is a bit brighter. It's probably more similar to Nymphette or Cherish if you guys have either of those. Those happen to be the two that I don't currently have in my collection, other than Electric Bloom, which if you guys are curious about that one, definitely check out my video about that because that blush just did not work for me for some reason. But I do like that at least this shade brings a little bit more diversity to my collection. Very, very pretty though. Again, I already knew I loved this formula, so that's not news at all. But I love just how buildable this formulation is, how soft and blurring it looks on the cheeks. Very, very nice. So now for Paradise Glow. So I'm going to first go into the deeper shade on this side actually with my Designer Pro from Sonia G. And because I already have Paradise Venus, I do know that this shade is very pigmented. So if you have a skin tone similar to myself or any fairer, you definitely want to be a little careful with this shade. As you can see, I am trying to just apply the smallest amount, but it is quite pigmented, so I do need to kind of buff it out a bit on this side. Whereas on the other side, I didn't really have to do any of that. I could actually just very easily build up the pigment. That said, this is a gorgeous shade. If you don't already own Paradise Venus as a single, I do think this is a nice value potentially for picking that up while also getting another shade. Very, very beautiful. And then let me also just pick up some of the lighter shade too. Ooh, okay. The lighter shade is also a little bit more pigmented than I anticipated. Okay, that's good to know. I guess the Rays shades are just really not very firmly pressed into the pan. So that is something to keep in mind because when I apply Desert Orchid or Nude Venus, which are kind of the equivalents of this shade, I normally don't have any issue with them being very pigmented. But I think because this is just so softly pressed, it just picks up very easily. Not necessarily a problem, but just something to keep in mind when you first use this. So there we go. I will say I do really like how this looks. It is very beautiful. This kind of combines two of my existing favorites, which are Desert Orchid and Paradise Venus. So I am liking the way this looks. Before we get into my overall thoughts and initial impressions about these blushes though, I did want to quickly give you guys some swatches and demo the highlighters as well. So when she came out with this new release, it was kind of ambiguous at first whether she was announcing new highlighter formulas or whether they were the same as the existing Divine Glow highlighters that she has, because she described them as new, but at least one of the shades, Paradise Venus, was already previously released. So I have that here in this holiday edition, but I guess she's basically now made this more permanent, or at least has released it in a single. So that's this shade over here, which is a really beautiful peachy highlighter. Hopefully you guys can see some of that. The one shade in her Divine Glow highlighters that she did previously release was this one, Golden Nectar. So this is basically what the packaging will look like if you pick up any of this new release. Based on what we have since learned, it does seem like this is the same formula, but what she meant by new is she came out with some new shades. But in case you have any of the existing Divine Glow highlighters, it should basically be the same formula. So here we have the two swatches, Venus Nectar on the top and Golden Nectar on the bottom. She also came out with a new champagne highlighter with a slight yellow undertone, and based on the swatches I've seen, it's pretty similar to Golden Nectar, just a little bit more yellow gold. So for this side of my face, I'm going to go in with the Venus Nectar shade, since I think that slight peachiness will better complement this side. I'm going to lay it on kind of heavy just so you guys can really see it. But as you can see, this highlighter is really beautiful. It is one of my favorite highlighter formulas. Not my overall favorite Pat McGrath highlight, but really gorgeous. And you can see that brings a lot of glow in comparison to just having the blushes by themselves. And then on the other side, I'm gonna dip into the Golden Nectar highlight, which does have a really nice golden sheen to it. I will say, compared to some other highlighters, this is slightly texture enhancing. So if you are very concerned about texture on your cheeks, I would point you to some other highlighter formulas. In particular, I think her Divine Rose highlighter is a lot more flattering on texture in comparison. I'm not actually sure if she's still selling this, but this is my overall favorite Pat McGrath formula that she's come out with so far for highlight. And I think you can see a little bit of that even just in terms of the swatch. The Divine Rose highlighter is very smooth. So as you can tell on the cheeks, there's not going to be a huge difference in terms of these shades. At least for me, I feel like I don't see a huge difference. I can see a little bit more peachiness here, a little bit more gold here, but they are quite similar. So if you do already have some of her Divine Glow highlighters, getting them in additional shades is probably not going to make the biggest difference unless you go in with that deeper shade which she released, which I think that one looks really nice and looks very different from the existing shades. Let me actually also just put a little bit of this Golden Nectar shade down the bridge of my nose. I realized I didn't really do that much highlighting earlier. And then I'm going to take a tiny bit of Venus Nectar as well and just put it along my brow bone and inner corner. So here we have the final look. Lots of blush, lots of highlight. So in terms of my overall impressions about this release, I would say that if you're someone who did not buy any of her Divine blushes originally, I think it is a really good idea to look into these. So I think this is a nice way for you to get a little bit more value for a very similar price point, and you have that same really gorgeous blush formula. For me personally, my two favorite Divine blushes are Desert Orchid and Divine Rose, and so I feel like that's kind of reflected inadvertently in the two shades that I picked. Basically, this lighter blush is very similar to Divine Rose, and this deeper one is similar to Desert Orchid and also Paradise Venus, or is exactly the same as Paradise Venus for part of it. So if you didn't previously pick up any of these blushes, or if there are shades you've been eyeing for a while but haven't really been able to justify the cost, then I think this release is a really excellent way to try out some more shades without paying as much per shade. That said, if you are looking at this because you love Pat McGrath's Divine Blushes, you have a bunch of them at home, then that's where it gets a little bit more dicey. I think there's a decent chance that whatever shades you're gravitating to in this new release probably are very similar to some of the existing shades that you own. So for me, for example, because I own almost all of her Divine Blushes, I don't really think there's any one of these duos that are that significantly different from what I already have in my collection. So I do wish she came out with some more unique shades, like maybe we could have had some more orangey blushes or some more plummy blushes. There's definitely some blush shades that are still missing from her collection. In terms of quality, I would say overall these performed very, very similarly to her existing Divine Blushes. The only slight critique I have is the shades on the raised side do tend to be a little bit softer pressed, and so you get a lot more kick up in the pan, which is not my favorite. The rose side though is very firmly pressed, similar to her singles, and so that's just the one small thing I would call out quality wise. On the whole though, I really like these new duos. I will personally have to do some soul searching to think about whether I can really justify the cost for myself, because I do have shades that look like this already. But in terms of this release, for any of you who do not have so many Divine Blushes, I would overall recommend it. In terms of the Divine Glow highlights, I am glad that she expanded this range, and especially that she added in that deeper shade. I do think that there could be some more diversity in the shades, because basically she added a very deep shade, but the other three shades are all in a more similar category of depth. As you guys can see today from the two shades on my cheeks right now, there's not a huge difference between the two. So if you're someone who already has a Divine Glow highlighter, I don't think you necessarily need to run out and pick up one of these new ones unless you're really interested in the deeper shade. So that's all of my initial impressions about these Divine Blush duos. I will have to keep you guys updated in my monthly roundup in terms of how my impressions of these evolve. I would love to hear down in the comments below what you guys think about this release. Have you picked up any of these blushes? Do you plan on picking them up? And let's just all keep our fingers crossed that hopefully the next Pat McGrath release is a bigger release. That's something brand new. I really want to see a new Mothership or maybe bronzers or something. That would all be really exciting. So let's see what else Pat McGrath has up her sleeves for this year. But thank you guys so much for watching to the end of this video. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Thank you all so much for joining me today, and I'll catch you next time. Bye!